Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting of Tuesday, the 12th of February. Okay, our agenda today, not quite as packed as usual, but it's still very, very much fun. Item number 1, filming at meetings. Please note that this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending this meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by other people who are also attending this meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting, for example, making deputations, asking questions or making oral protests, should be aware that they are likely to be filmed, recorded or reported upon. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. The chair of this meeting, that's me, has the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by this Council. Okay. Right. Okay. Apologies for absence. Item number 2.
Chair, we have apologies for lateness from Councillor Mark Blake.
I've also got apologies for absence for Councillor Ajay. Okay, item number 3 is about urgent business. Whilst we do not have any new items of urgent business, however, we do have 2 items of late business to consider relating to items 9 and 10 on this agenda. I've accepted these items as urgent business, and these are as follows. An EQIA for consideration with the Borough Plan at item 9. This report was late to allow finalisation of the presentation of key data and needs urgent consideration alongside the Borough Plan itself. This is deemed urgent in order to agree the recommendations set out within the report and to allow the Borough Plan to be considered alongside the budget report. In relation to the MTFS report at item 10, there is also an addendum which sets out some minor updates to the report, which need to be noted before considering the recommendations. This addendum has to be considered with the 2019-20 Budget Medium-Term Financial Strategy, the MTFS, which is for 2019 and for the financial year 2019 to 20 to the financial year 2023 to 24. And that could be considered at our meeting tonight to facilitate an accurate recommendation on the adoption of the 2019-20 Budget MTFS, which is going to be made to the full Council at its meeting on the 25th of February 2019. Further, to meet the requirements of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, full Council needs to approve the budget and agree the Council tax for that year by the statutory deadline of 11th of March. Cabinet also needs to consider Appendix 7, which is the overview of Scrutiny Committee recommendations and proposed response. This was marked as to follow in the original documentation for this meeting and the original published agenda pack, but was not published with the original pack due to the requirement for an extraordinary overview and scrutiny committee meeting that was held on the 5th of February, and to enable any recommendations arising from this meeting to be addressed. The appendix is now included. Okay. Item number 4 is declarations of interest. I have a personal, non-pecuniary and non-beneficial interest in item 10, which is the medium-term financial strategy 2019-20 to 2023-24, as I have a connection with Fortismere Secondary School. Councillor Mark Blake, who is going to be late today, will also declare that same personal, non-pecuniary, non-beneficial interest in item number 10. I also have a personal interest in item number 12, which is the fees and charges report, as I have a connection with a charge increase listed. In fact, I lease a garage from the council. Does anybody else have any other declarations to make this evening? Councillor Tucker.
Chair, similarly, I also lease a garage, as does my partner.
Councillor Berryman.
Thank you, Chair. Personal and non-pecuniary interest in item 10, as I have a connection to Fortismere School.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else got any declarations? Nope. Okay, lovely. Item number 5 is a notice of intention to conduct business in private, any representations received and a response to any such representations.
Chair, there have been no representations received at the time of the agenda publication.
Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I just wanted to note that we have deputations this evening, and I was going to suggest that we vary the agenda in order to facilitate the deputations being able to make comments on things that might be appropriate. The proposal will be that after the deputations at item number 8, we're going to take the budget report 2019-20 and MTFS, because that is what the deputation is making a representation upon. After that, we will then take the housing strategy, which is another housing issue, then the housing company, which is another housing issue, and then the property licensing designation, and then we will follow the agenda as is in your pack. Okay, is that agreed? Is that agreed? Great, lovely, thank you very much. Item number 6, minutes. The minutes are on pages 1 to 22 of your report. If Cabinet could have a view of the minutes, and can I confirm that we're comfortable that the minutes are a correct record of the meeting held on the 22nd of January? Is that agreed? Lovely, thank you very much. Number 7, matters referred to Cabinet by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. There are no matters to report from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Item number 8, deputations, petitions, questions. We have received a request for deputation for consideration at this meeting. This has been put forward by Mr Paul Burnham on behalf of Haringey Defence Council Housing in relation to item 10 on our agenda this evening. The deputation spokesperson will have 3 minutes to address the Cabinet. I will then invite Cabinet colleagues to put forward questions to the deputation party. Following this, the Cabinet member for Housing and Estate Renewal... No, I'm sorry. Following this, the Cabinet member for Finance. Finance and Resources will address or will respond to the issues raised in the deputations, and Cabinet will then continue to consider the report in question. Mr Burnham. Good evening, Mr Burnham. Mr Secker. Good evening, Mr Secker. I know that you guys are well versed in this experience, so can I say that you'll have 3 minutes-ish? I'm quite happy to allow you the ish, since you guys have been here for so often and so frequently, to make your deputation.
Okay, thank you and good evening to everybody. This is Jacob Secker with me from Broadwater Farm. So our deputation is regarding the tenant service charges, which is a small part of the budget that you've got in front of you, but it's something of great concern for us. It's been a matter of great concern for a long time, because there was a time when service charges were really minor, certainly for council tenants were really minor, and then governments and landlords of different kinds have pursued a policy of increasing the amounts and complexity of service charges. Now, that was put forward in order to empower tenants, that if you have these service charges, Haringey has 21 weekly service charges at the moment. If you have all these service charges, tenants are going to be more able to hold our landlords to account. We don't believe that that has been the effect, because the process has not got better over time, it's got worse. One example of it getting worse is that we used to have consultation. So every year, or sometimes more frequently, the council would announce its proposals for service charges. We would be able to discuss that and make representations through a consultation process. There were times when that was very successful from our point of view because certain charges were not proceeded with due to the responses that took place. But unfortunately, since the year 2015, we've no longer had any consultation whatsoever, and the attitude has simply been that the tenants get issued with the charges, and that's that. And then it got worse even than that this year, when the proposed charges were not included in the report that was presented in December. And there were no information available during the budget consultation period. So despite that, we wrote a contribution to the consultation, and despite not knowing what was going to be on the agenda for tonight, we put in a deputation request. So then, after all of that, we finally get the proposed figures in the report, and it's distressing again, it's disappointing that, as far as I can see, there's no explanation about why these changes of this scale are taking place. But we see £656,000 of increased income that's proposed to come from tenant service charges, and I've got the top four biggest ones at the top of the page: 7.4% increase, 10% increase, 7% increase, and 15.8% increase. Now, we don't have any explanation about exactly what. We know that there are changes in the economy all the time. We know that no 2 years are the same, but these are huge changes. Now, service charges, of course, are specific and distinct from the rent, because under the law, the landlord's allowed to charge for services, but only to the cost of the actual services. So the question then, which we are going to ask, of course, is what on earth is going on here? What changes may be taking place? Now, the council has provided us with no information about that, but we have been able to find some information from Homes for Haringey. And from Homes for Haringey's board meeting, had a report 2 weeks ago in which they say that they've done a very good performance on service charges in the current year. They say that the 7 different service charges, 2 of them are slightly over budget, and the other 5 are within budget. And they say that the headline surplus they're going to end up with at the end of the year is going to be £209,000. Now,
1 minute, please.
Yes. Now, I think you can see where I'm going and the questions which we're asking of you. We're really disappointed in the way that you've dealt with this, and quite frankly, why are there? Is there the suggestion of huge service charges? It doesn't seem to us that there's any necessity for service charges based on what Homes of Haringey have done in the last year, and presumably what they can do in the next year. We hope they'll do a better performance in the next year. So really, we're asking, and I just finally say, I'll be absolutely honest about this, is that there has been a practice for a long time of landlords topping up the rent from the service charges in one form or another. We honestly suspect that may be going on. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, Mr. Burnham, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any Cabinet members who have questions for the deputation? Okay, can I then now ask Councillor Berryman to respond to the deputation, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Burnham, Mr. Secker, for coming and feeding in, albeit at a late stage and not through any fault of your own, into the budget process, because it is appreciated when people feed in. I myself certainly don't know everything, and the council budget is quite a complex, wide-ranging thing, and some of what you say may have been overlooked by myself, if not by officers. So I think it's welcome that you're here pointing out these things. As I understand it, the service charges are there to cover the costs of actual services for residents and make sure that the right people pay for the right things. So if you have lifts and they need service, you might pay, but if you're living in a low-rise accommodation with no lifts, you wouldn't be paying for somebody else's lifts. That's kind of, as I understand, the legality around it, and you can only charge for the cost of the service. So last year, quite a few of the utilities, as I know, went down because gas and electric bills were going down, the wholesale prices of gas and electricity. This year, as you point out, there's a couple of main ones that have gone up, the concierge service and the street sweeping, for want of a better phrase, on estates. In terms of the necessity to consult, it's my understanding from our legal services that there's not a legal requirement to consult, but you're saying there might be good practice, and that is something that we're listening to and will take into account for future years. So, thank you for pointing that out. In terms of those two rises, though, the concierge service is a reflection, the two main ones that make up the bulk of the increase in the budget of 600,000 that you've pointed to. Concierge service is largely an employee-driven service, and as I understand it, the concierges received a pay rise above inflation. That's where that main cost is coming from. The street sweeping is a high priority for residents on most of the feedback from residents. So I would hope and look into the exact reasons as to why that's gone up by around 20%. So, I thank you for bringing this to my attention at least. Well, no, you've brought them to my attention. Officers have been able to explain it from Homes for Haringey, that the concierge service, which I have anecdotally heard that they've received better terms and conditions, that's the main cost. It's an employee-driven service, and the main cost is the staff. And the litter is a similar employee-driven, and people have expressed an interest in having that service improved. So that's where we are. We are going to listen, take it into account in future years. It's not a legal requirement, but it's something for us to think about. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation today. This isn't a two-way conversation. This isn't a two-way conversation, Paul. Sorry. Okay. Can I? Right. I can accept that. I've heard. We've heard what you've said on that. I will certainly look at how consultation happens going forward. Okay. But thank you for your deputation today. Okay, we are now going to move on to item number 10, which is the budget report itself, budget report 2019-20 and MTFS pages, which are on pages 101 to 288 of your pack. Councillor Berryman, could you kindly introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this report contains our 5-year medium-term financial strategy, 2019 to 2024, which will provide a clear financial plan for Haringey during this period of uncertainty for local authority budgeting. Firstly, I'm pleased to say we've managed to bridge the gap that was still there in the December budget report and arrived at this through minimal recourse to additional budget reductions, savings, cuts, call them what you will. So we've managed to close the gap without having to use those, make savings or cuts. Over the last 8 years, our budget has experienced unprecedented reduction, and while governments say austerity is over, in Haringey we definitely find our funding is not keeping up with rising costs or demand. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find budget reductions, and there's also a risk that further cuts will impact most on those with the greatest need of our support, as well as potentially having a negative impact on the quality of life of residents. There's also, some would say the risk, some would say the fact, that we've reached the stage in local government where further cuts in themselves will generate future overspends. That's been highlighted by the Breaking Point campaign. Councillor Richard Watts, who's leading that from neighbouring Islington, pointing out, for example, if you cut a children's service, you then may have an overspend in youth services later on, looked after children and so forth. So, as people say, austerity doesn't even work on its own terms. Despite the pressures, we have manifesto priorities, and this draft budget will support the delivery of some of those, including youth services, a free school meals pilot, signing up to the London living wage, commitment to extend council tax reduction to 100% for families most in need, which was a key manifesto pledge. The removal of the HRA borrowing cap was very much welcomed, as it will help us in fulfilling our other main manifesto, one of our other main manifesto commitments to deliver 1,000 new council homes by 2022. There are still significant pressures we face. Next year is going to be hard again, and we will have to go through what we've just gone through again, another budget consultation. This one has ended, and I thank all the residents who took part, and I'm pleased to report that we're now able to put forward this balanced budget for 2019-20, and also estimate we will not utilise balances in 2018-19. So I'm recommending this report to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Berryman. Could I ask Councillor Connor to come forward and present the scrutiny recommendations and the scrutiny views on this budget, please? Oh, you're there already.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to present the OSC Budget Scrutiny Report, which is contained in Appendix 7 of the MTFS report. As we begin, I'd like to pay special thanks to our scrutiny officers who've been working under pressure this year due to the number of requests for information and extra meetings needed, and I would like to personally thank them for their hard work and support. I would ask that the Cabinet notes the important work carried out by scrutiny, ensuring the budget is effectively monitored and scrutinised. To this end, I draw the Cabinet's attention to the cross-cutting items that scrutiny highlighted this year around more finance officer support for budget scrutiny, both in the quarterly monitoring and the OSC end-of-year budget scrutiny. As chairs of the scrutiny panels have noted this year, there are many of the budget savings with a high or medium risk. In the main OSC report on the 28th of January, out of the savings identified, around half were in this category of medium to high risk. We know that last year 80% of the children's savings were written off, and whilst this year we were very pleased to see that unachievable savings from this previous year have been removed, we note that there is a real risk that is accepted by officers around the next year's proposed savings. Finance officers also noted that the Council has added £10.5 million of corporate reserves and balances into balancing the 2019-20 budget. The Capital will have read the detailed budget scrutiny report from OSC, and whilst the scrutiny members acknowledge the risk around unachievable savings, there is also a risk of making savings that will negatively impact residents who need our support. With the time available, I would therefore like to draw Cabinet's attention to the 3 savings that were brought back to Cabinet for their reconsideration. Within the adults and health, there was charging for managed accounts and transfer of high-cost day opportunities. Within the Environment and Community Safety panel, there was one on flexible police resources. OSC argued under the budget savings for charging and managing accounts for the removal of the proposed charges, as it was felt that a maximum charge of £650 per year would negatively impact those on benefits. Only if the residents have savings of below £1,000 will these costs not apply. Service users and families on benefits are often struggling, and the risk is that if these yearly charges are made, it could tip a family from just about managing to not, with all the risk that that entails. This not only would incur costs or possibly incur costs the Council later, but more importantly, place enormous stress on the service user and their relative. So please could the Cabinet reconsider this saving. The transfer of high-cost day opportunities will initially need to spend on high-quality care in order to achieve responsible savings later. By placing all these savings in Year 2, this places an enormous pressure on heads of service to make savings when this may not be achievable. High-quality care may well indeed produce savings, but these need to be person-focused and based on care needs. Making savings too soon could negatively impact on care. Could these savings be reduced or spread over more time to mitigate this? Finally, the proposal to ask again that Cabinet not cut the funding to the flexible police resources. In the Council's own borough plan in the EQIA, it notes that most age groups say that crime or antisocial behaviour is one of the things they most dislike about living in Haringey. Concerns over safety are highest amongst older people, and I would also add fear of knife crime amongst our youth. The Cabinet response acknowledges that it can be considered this proposal would have a disproportionate impact on the east of the borough, as the east has the highest number of victims and crime. Yet the Cabinet hasn't agreed to remove this saving, so my question is, why not? I would ask that these 3 savings be reconsidered again this evening. I haven't yet touched on the capital budget scrutiny, as to be honest, this was a difficult area to scrutinise, as the panels were given brief information around a proposed capital spend without a lot of detail to scrutinise. The Housing and Regen panel noted that they were not fully able to scrutinise the capital section of the budget, as members felt that the information they had received did not contain sufficient detail. Going forward, it is suggested that the quarterly budget monitoring within each panel will be informed of any capital budget projects and given a timescale for when the business cases are ready to be scrutinised. This will allow OSC to have a rolling timetable of upcoming capital budget projects and can scrutinise them when the budget information is available. I would like to finish with an acknowledgement of the uniqueness of scrutiny, whereby backbenchers can come together to honestly discuss and probe the budgets within their areas. This year, the panel members have risen to the challenge and demanded better. We look forward to a more effective scrutiny process and working with everyone to ensure this happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Connor. Okay, can I ask whether or not Cabinet member colleagues have any questions for Councillor Berryman on this report? Okay. Can I now ask whether any other councillors present have any questions for Councillor Connor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Berryman on this report. Sorry, Pat. No, okay. Councillor Brabazon.
Turn to Appendix 3 of the budget report. I did ask for it to be printed, but I haven't collected it yet. I can't remember what page it's on. So if you give me a moment. Can you tell me what page it's on, Aisha? Sorry? It's on page 126, is that right? Yes, capital programme. Sorry, page... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, thank you. I'm not sure this is for Councillor Berryman. I think it may be for the leader or for Councillor Tucker. On the Appendix 3, it's not on page 160 in this pack. Priority 1, capital programme. It's not on one. Sorry. Anyway, I remember what it says. I think it describes a secondary estate development. Can you confirm what exactly that project is in that language?
Could you ask all your questions at the same time,
okay.
Please?
It says here secondary estate mixed development. If you could clarify for me and for anyone else here exactly what that refers to. I'm afraid I would ask you that first because my second question follows from the first one. Priority 1, 115.
Apparently there's the possibility of the consideration of a development at Fortismere.
Can you explain why it doesn't say that?
I'm sorry, if you'd like to turn to which page in the report, because I understand it does so in the report. Could you ask all of your questions at the same time, please?
Yes, I will. My next question is, given that this is a very expensive development, can you tell me what due diligence has been done up to now in preparation for this and how this was brought into the capital programme?
Well, at the moment, the whole process around the capital programme are things that we might consider doing if a business case can be made in order to do it. As I understand at the moment, no such business case exists, though we are considering whether or not we're going to do it.
Can you explain then how...
Can you ask all of your questions at the same time, please, and then we will progress.
Right. Then, if no business case has been prepared, can you explain how a feasibility study has been undertaken and a housing desktop study, both of which have been at cost to the council? That's my final question.
In order to get to the position where we decide whether or not we're going to do something or develop something or create a business case, we need to do our due diligence. These are part of any due diligence as to whether or not a project needs to take the next step forward. At the moment, we are where we are. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. Councillor Berryman, you mentioned the £6.5 million gap that has been closed in the last month. What extent does bridging that gap reflect actual genuine changes to the council's cost level, as opposed to kind of how they're accounted for? There seems to be lots of costs, and it's in 8.1 of the item, where there's service improvements of £1.4 million worth of savings this year, and then there's a cost of £800,000 next year, and the same with grant changes. It seems to be reusing grants this year and then having to repay them next year.
Do you have other questions? Could you ask them all at the same time, please?
I can. 3.1.10 rents. This is the last year, I think, that there's an imposed reduction in council rents by the government. What assumption is there for rent increases or decreases in every year of the medium-term financial plan? And then my third question would be, what measures of success will be used for the free school meals pilot, and what outcomes would lead to it not being rolled out more widely?
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. On the budget gap, we have bridged it in the last few weeks through three main areas. As you can see, the service improvements, grant changes and technical adjustments. To take you through those, the first group, service improvements, or otherwise known service budget changes, included cost from parking but a saving later on. We're investing in a car pound. Looking at our commercial portfolio that moved to the general fund last year, and ways that we can invest in that and then therefore generate more rent, and look at how we manage it and improvements in how we manage it. We've looked at our library stock and seen that for example, there are some parts of libraries that are underutilised. There's a property above one of the libraries that hasn't, as I understand it, had a tenant right now, so there's some changes there which had been not yet put into the budget, raises some money. And then there's some reduction in the growth provision in adults, which officers had previously thought there might be some growth in the service that could have led to a cost, but have now seen with some of the new grants come in and the ways of working that won't take place until the following year, so that's come back in. Then the next bit, the grant changes. We had a little bit more money just before Christmas from the government. The delayed settlement from government, which was delayed by the Brexit vote in Parliament, brought in just over £1 million from the levy surplus payment. There was also we found that the government were taking less from us in the housing benefit, giving more back to us in housing benefit and council tax administration, so that improved. Overall, in those areas, business rates, we had to revise that down a little, but overall it brought in just under £2 million. And then there were some technical adjustments. We've projected slightly higher collection in council tax because we've tended to outperform previous projections. Borrowing rates have been coming down in the UK despite the threat of Brexit, so we've reduced some of the capital spend that was planned, I think, around the HDV has been reduced, so that brought down for next year some of the cost of interest on borrowing. There were some other grants that came in, and the use of those grants, like flexible homeless support, enabled us to make use of that money and therefore offset some money elsewhere, and also some flexible use of capital receipts that the government extended another 3 years of making flexible use of capital receipts to fund revenue spend where you're transforming a service or delivering efficiencies. So, to be honest, it was the extra few weeks, I think, helped the officers. Having the late funding from the government, but the extra few weeks from December until now gave them the time to really push all the numbers and get us over the line without any recourse to general fund reserves. I think that answers that question. On the council rents, I understand next year the government or is it the year after, we'll be proposing CPI plus 1%. I'm not sure, I'll have to check if that's factored in. That's factored in, CPI plus 1%. So we've had, I think, about 3 or maybe 4 years of the government insisting council rents go down by 1%, which wouldn't disappoint our previous residents. But at the same time, you know, councils, we want to make sure our housing stock is not run down, and the government did that purely, really, I think, to lower their housing benefit costs, not really, and that's put a pressure on trying to manage those accounts. If your rent's going down every year, inflation's going up. Next year, it's allowed to go back up with inflation plus 1%, and we've factored that in at the moment. And the measure of success for the school meals pilot, I think, Councillor Ejiofor, you're going to be doing tastings?
We'll come back to you with a written response on that one, if that's okay, yeah?
Just to correct my CFO, it's 2021-22 when council rents will be allowed back up. 2021.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other councillors who've got any questions for Councillor Berryman on this report? Okay. Okay. Cabinet will need to take account of the updated information contained in the addendum at page 85 to 86 of the second pack, which is on your table or on your laptop, which is a change to the recommendation. So just bear with me whilst I look at this one. Right. So that's this bit here. Yeah? Right. The corrected, there is a section which needs to be corrected, which is 3.1.5, which is within the recommendation. So if I read out the corrected recommendation, all right, and then we'll take it. Councillor Berryman.
Thank you, Chair, for alerting me to that. I should have said it first time. Yeah, there's a correction in section 315 where the specific general fund budget requirement for 2019-20 should read 241.182 million. So not a comma, it's 241 dot or 0.182 million. So 241 million thereabouts.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that in mind, the recommendations for this report are on pages 106 to 108 of our pack, 3.1 to 3.1.21 with the amended addendum mentioned in 3.1.5. Okay. That having been said, can I ask Cabinet colleagues whether or not we're comfortable with agreeing these recommendations? Can we agree? Lovely. Thank you very much. Given the focus of the deputation on housing, we've already agreed that we're going to vary the agenda to consider the housing reports next. So the next report is on the housing strategy. It is on agenda item 14. It is within pages 761 to 776 of your report pack. Councillor Ibrahim, could you kindly introduce your report?
Thank you. So I'll try to be brief. Haringey Labour councillors were elected in May on a bold manifesto which recognised the importance of housing and the further work that the council needs to do in this area. We have 5 key pledges which I'll remind everybody of: to deliver 1,000 new council homes, review the planning targets, expand our landlord licensing scheme, to ensure that new housing for sale is made available to Haringey residents first, and to end street homelessness in Haringey by 2022. So Haringey's housing strategy sets the strategic direction for housing in the borough. The Council has published the Council previously published a housing strategy in 2016. Since then, as well as a new administration, with these new priorities and ways of working, there's been some key changes on a national and regional level, which if you read our existing strategy, increasingly starts to look a little bit out of touch with a lot of the changes that have taken place both locally and nationally. So the government has abandoned a number of its most contested proposed housing policies, and there has been a renewed focus on social housing, and this is prompted at least in part by the Grenfell tragedy. At the same time, we've had key changes like the lifting of the HRA borrowing cap and significant new funding for councils from the GLA to transform the potential to develop new council housing. Haringey has successfully bid for £62.8 million in grant to deliver council homes in the borough. So what that has meant for us is that work on a new housing strategy has already gotten underway. But to ensure that we can change some of the things that we can change now as quickly as possible, we need to make sure that it's consistent with the adoption of the borough plan. So in order to do this, in the interim, we are proposing that Appendix C of the current housing strategy is amended now to define more clearly what we mean by affordable housing. The new appendix is clear that our first priority is council rented homes, and that we will ensure other affordable homes delivered in the borough will be affordable to our existing residents. We're also going to start the process of developing a new housing strategy to address all our housing commitments and to better reflect our manifesto commitments of the last year. I've already started the process of establishing a members group to guide this important work, and I look forward to working with fellow councillors over the next year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ibrahim. Do any other Cabinet member colleagues have any questions on this report? Okay. Do any other councillors present have any questions on this report? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. Question one. Do you want all of them at once, or
yes.
You one by one? One by one is. Do whatever you want. So paragraph 6.8 states the affordable housing mix should be flexed in different areas. Can you reassure us that this won't mean that in some parts of the borough we're getting a lower percentage of affordable units, and actually we need them everywhere?
So I don't think the specific focus will be in different parts of the borough per se, but what I would assume, and I will clarify this with officers, that it would be on a site-by-site basis dependent on what that site is able to deliver. So I don't think it means, I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean that a certain part of the borough would be identified for a different mix specifically, but more on a scheme-by-scheme basis. Can I have some clarification if I'm right or wrong on that?
Yes, so actually I think the principal intention of that particular policy is if anything, to kind of redress whatever imbalances might already exist in a particular part of the borough. So if there's a particular predominance of a certain kind of housing in one part of the borough, you might slightly tweak the mix of a scheme there to provide a better mix overall in that area, if that makes sense. But it's just, I mean, Councillor Ibrahim's right that one always needs to retain a degree of kind of site-by-site flexibility so that you can get the best out of any individual site while also achieving the maximum possible outcome across the whole borough.
The policy of favouring social homes at social rents, you mentioned before that you're also going to have sufficient provision of other affordable rental accommodation. Will you have London Living Rent as like a benchmark of where those houses will be? What would be the affordability check on those?
So I wouldn't personally view, obviously London living rent and affordable rent are different types of products. I think for me, the benchmark is social rented. If we were going to be talking in benchmark terms of what would be ultimately what we should measure things against, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't look at those types of rents for a particular scheme or being part of schemes. But if I would probably say if we're talking about benchmarking, then I would use that word more to define social rented. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Just to clarify what the policy says, it's that, as Councillor Ibrahim says, it's that it's making a very clear preference for social rented housing, as it were, as the preferred form of affordable housing, but recognising the distinction between kind of the social rented and intermediate homes. Within the intermediate category, the policy is very clear that the preference now is for intermediate rents at London living rent levels rather than, say, shared ownership. There's a technical distinction between rents at London living rent levels and the actual London living rent product, because the London living rent product, as defined by the Mayor, involves this element of sale, which is not this administration's preference, but certainly the London living rent way of setting rents, which benchmarks rents against incomes rather than market, is certainly the preference for that kind of intermediate housing.
Thank you. Last one. On page 4, it states a minimum of 10% of all affordable homes should be wheelchair accessible, with an aspiration of 20%. Do these figures reflect that we've got an ageing population and chances are demand for that accessible accommodation is only ever likely to increase?
I would presume that that comes from an element of research and an element of understanding what the needs are. So I could find out a little bit more about that and maybe give you a written answer. Is that okay?
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other councillors have any questions to ask on this? Okay. Cabinet, I'd be grateful if we can turn to page 762 of our pack. The recommendations are paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2. Cabinet colleagues, are these agreed? Lovely, thank you very much. Agenda item number 15 is the housing company. This you will find on pages 777 to 852 of your pack. Councillor Ibrahim, could you kindly introduce your reports, please?
Thank you. So I don't want to repeat myself too much, but as you all know, our manifesto committed us to delivering at least 1,000 new council homes at council rents by 2022. This is a scale of council house building that we haven't seen in this country since the 1970s. This is the latest report which we are bringing forward to put in place the structures that we need to deliver these homes. Our stated preference in the manifesto was to build council housing directly through a company we fully own. But this was at a time when the GLA funding was not available and was before the announcement in the October budget of the scrapping of the HRA borrowing cap. We have now taken the time to consider what these changes mean for housing delivery in the borough and the role that the company can at best play to make that delivery happen. Our decision this evening creates the housing company we promised to support the creation of new homes for Haringey families on our waiting list. The housing company itself will be one of many initiatives which form part of the plan going forward. So although there have been changes, the wholly owned company still forms part of our plans in order to make sure that we achieve the best possible numbers over the coming years.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ibrahim. Are there any councillors with any questions on this report? Okay, I'll take it, people in order I saw. Councillor Bevan.
Thank you very much. I think you realise I don't often come to Cabinet, but there were some items on here that I thought might be worth mentioning. The first item, I'm concerned that on this company there are no councillors on the board, And the other items, I'm speaking as a director of Homes for Haringey, as a board member. I noticed in the report that the cost of setting up this company is approximately 500k, which to me is absolutely stunning. I also note that it's being paid for out of the flexible homelessness grant, and I'm actually wondering whether the legal service has given an opinion on that. And I also am aware that the council is proposing other companies as well. I'm assuming they will each cost 500k to set up. And in the Homes for Haringey board, we have discussed all this because we wondered how we could help the council meet its housing targets. And the board went through all this in quite a lengthy detail. And the outcome of that discussion at the board was that Homes for Haringey could probably fulfil all these aims just by tweaking some of its articles of association, so there would be no need to set up all these companies. So can I ask the Cabinet member and the leader, before any more expenditure is spent on this type of thing, that perhaps you talk to Homes for Haringey, the Chair and the Chief Executive?
Can I just clarify, are you asking this as a councillor, Councillor Bevan, or on behalf of Homes for Haringey?
My comment about councillors on the board was as a councillor. The other comments are as my responsibility as a director of Homes for Haringey.
Just to clarify, so your second question is on behalf of the board?
Everything is on behalf of the board, apart from the comment about the number of no councillors being on this new company.
Okay, so in terms of the set-up and the legal requirements, I will pass that over to officers because I know that there are some specific issues around that. In terms of conversations with Homes for Haringey, so yes, that's been an ongoing discussion. I meet regularly with the Chief Executive of Homes for Haringey, but also what I would refer members to is the manifesto commitment that we stood on, and the manifesto commitment that we stood on, and part of that was the setting up of a wholly owned company. Obviously, I would recognise that some of these questions from fellow Labour councillors were not necessarily raised at the time, and it was a manifesto commitment that we all stood on and we were all committed to. So I would reiterate that this was the direction of travel which we now have a mandate from the residents who voted for us to carry forward. Obviously, all the way through that process, we will continue to have discussions with Homes for Haringey. In terms of those conversations, I think I find them to be quite fruitful, and there is a recognition from the staff that I speak to from Homes for Haringey that this is the new direction of travel for this council. In terms of some of the questions around the governance, I'll refer that to Dan, if that's okay.
Yeah, so on the first of all, on the governance point, it's correct that there are not proposed to be any members on the board. And the presumption was that because members would set, through the setting of the business plan, the parameters within which the company would need to work, the board itself wouldn't need members on because the officers nominated to the board would simply be working within those parameters, those strategic parameters that had already been set by members. And it wasn't, that was considered that was the appropriate way to approach the governance. On the costs, it's right that we've set a kind of maximum allocation of the sum that you mentioned, Councillor Bevan, from the Flexible Homes Support Grant. I can say now that, given that what we now know about, I mean, that ceiling was set at the time where we thought the company was going to be the main engine of the development programme. As Councillor Ibrahim has said, that position has changed because of the HRA cap being lifted. So we now expect the costs of this to come in well under that figure. We don't have an exact number yet, but we're certainly not expecting to get anywhere close to that ceiling, and nor do we expect to incur costs at that level on the other companies that we're proposing to set up. I mean, I would say that all of the companies, including this housing company that's the subject of this report will have an impact on our work to reduce homelessness. So, for example, one of the, as is clear from the report, the purpose of this company is to hold forms of rented housing which aren't social rented housing and therefore can't be held in the HRA. I think it's pretty clear to us that that kind of housing is a potential solution for some families in homelessness need, and that's one of the reasons why we would be interested in developing that kind of housing in the council. So I'm comfortable, and certainly the proposals in this report have been subject to legal and financial examination. I'm comfortable for my part that that's an appropriate use of that funding.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Bevan. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. I think some of them might be slight follow-ups to some of the questions that Councillor Bevan just raised. Could Homes for Haringey deliver the housing targets that you set yourself?
So I think that would. So what this administration has committed to do is to directly deliver housing, and it's not to say that Homes for Haringey couldn't potentially be supported in building their capacity to do that. Let's be clear, Homes for Haringey is a tenancy management organisation. Like many other ALMOs, historic ALMOs, there aren't that many left. There isn't really a history of home building. So, yes, potentially. However, what we committed to do was to directly deliver these homes, and obviously in terms of an arm's length approach, that wasn't the direction of travel that we thought was in line with our manifesto commitments. Again, if officers want to add anything to that, that would be.
So the company won't be holding any socially rented homes, so that I'm guessing they will be in time transferred over to Homes for Haringey to administer. They're then vulnerable, I guess, for right to buy, so there will be dilution. Is that the case, that there isn't any way that we can hold them in the company so they're not then attributable to right to buy?
So that's a conundrum. So if so what we are saying is, because of the change in the HRA borrowing cap, that actually the social homes that we want to build, we will probably be likely doing that directly by the council. So then, yes, they would be subject to right to buy, but then so would they be if they were built by Homes for Haringey within the HRA. That doesn't necessarily change that. My understanding is that the wholly owned company would, because of the change and the new funding that's available to us and the new access we've got to borrowing, is that the wholly owned company would be used for different types of rents and not for social housing. The reality is that I think the issue around a family who has been on our waiting list for a very, very long time, then once allocated a social home that we've newly built, being able to purchase that immediately, or they would have to go through it, is not really a real risk. I mean, it's a very small one. And for me, my primary commitment has always been, and you know, this is nothing new, I've always been open about the fact that I think a secure tenancy is the best form of tenancy because of the protection that it provides around Ground 8. And I think I would always favour a secure tenancy and carry the risk of right to buy than a different form of tenancy, because particularly some of the issues that we're seeing around universal credit delays, for example, the likelihood of somebody accruing the amount of arrears because of those delays, for us to then be in a position where we use Ground 8 and evict them would be minuscule. So I think the reality is I've always felt that the best tenancy for the people that we seek to rehouse is a secure tenancy, and only a council can issue a secure tenancy. A wholly owned company cannot do that.
Just one last one. So the wholly owned company can't issue the type of leases that we want, and it can't hold any homes to take them out of right to buy if we think that is a risk. So I don't know, and it might be that you can give me more information, what the point is of it.
So just to reiterate, so there will be schemes where you need to have a mixture of properties which make the scheme financially tenable. This is my understanding. So in order to make those schemes work, isn't it better if we've got our wholly owned company where we can do that rather than having to go to another organisation in order to deliver those homes? So this gives us the ability, in my view, to have a combination of rents in a scheme that make it financially viable, but that we're still more in control of than we would be if we were partnering for those different products with a private developer. So it's a horses for courses approach, which was actually, can I just remind, when we did the scrutiny review, the recommendation overwhelmingly supported by your predecessors.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and avoid repetition, but obviously that was quite a... We've heard two quite lengthy questions there, so there may be some repetition, so forgive me for that. I think I'm actually more confused than I was at the beginning, because my original question was really to explain, as laid out in 6.4, what is really meant by the Council's ambition to deliver new homes and hold those rented homes that the HRA cannot. Because as I understand it, the HRA can only borrow money for social housing, as would be right, because it's the capital that is put against the loan. But then also it seems a little bit contradictory then to me at 8.3, where in the pack where it says the business case has to cover all the costs, so that would be the rent and all of the sundry costs, and even with the subsidy we're getting on those, I think that would be difficult to achieve. But maybe Amina answered that with saying these are not going to be social rented, these might be what we consider intermediate. Maybe you could explain that a bit further. And then also I just really wanted to reiterate what Councillor Bevan mentioned about that we don't have any councillor or member representation on this wholly owned company, and that the consideration, there's no mention actually in the documents here of why it was discounted that HFH could play a part in this. So those 3 points really, thanks.
I'll answer the last one first. Well, it was discounted because our manifesto commitment was to directly deliver those council homes, and we didn't want to take an arm's length approach. That may be a view that some councillors hold, but my commitment is to directly deliver those council homes and not to have a process by which it's effectively at arm's length, which is what an ALMO is, which effectively it's a tenancy management organisation which manages our tenancies at arm's length. That's not our direction of travel. So, sorry to repeat that, Councillor Williams, but I suppose what I'm doing is reiterating that. So, in terms of the intermediate product, so that's where we're talking about things like London Living Rent or London Affordable Rent, and obviously those homes would not be counted in our 1,000. So, if there were any homes that were built in order to make a scheme viable because you have a combination of products, then those homes would not be counting towards 1,000. They would simply, my understanding of it, be that they would help achieve those 1,000 by giving it a financial kind of making the scheme itself work financially. So whilst you wouldn't count the London affordable rents as part of your 1,000, there's still homes that you would potentially be letting to potentially homeless families, etc. So there are, I mean, I think this is what Dan was alluding to earlier on. So it's more to do with making the schemes work as opposed to them counting towards the 1,000 homes. So what you would effectively have is you would be delivering more homes than the 1,000, but those homes would cross-subsidise the ability to deliver the 1,000 at social rent. So can I ask officers to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. So on the question which I think you raised, Councillor, about the what can be done through the HRA. So the HRA can develop housing that's not for social rent. So, for example, in boroughs that are kind of more advanced in their programmes than us, Hackney has been doing that for some time, has been developing some homes in its HRA for market sale to subsidise the development of more social rent than would otherwise be possible. And in a way, the reason for the company is not about what the HRA is able to build, it's about what the HRA is then able to hold and charge rent on. And there are various particular rules that say if the council is holding a home and renting it out, that must be at a social rent. So if the council wants to hold a different kind of home and rent it out at a different rent, it has to do that through a company. And so, as Councillor Ibrahim says, other forms of intermediate rented housing, for example, as we were saying for the previous item, our preference would be that they would be at London living rent levels. It's also possible in the future, either because of a deliberate pursuing a different particular policy, or because, say, we wanted to wait before disposing of some market sale units until the market changed. We might want to have homes at private rents, at kind of market private rents too. What having the company does is give us the option to operate, to do that at any one time. Of course, you know, we're so early on in the programme now, we're not moving any homes into this company on day one. It gives us the flexibility to mix those tenures and even to kind of keep some homes in one kind of tenure for a while, say. More flexibility than we'd have if we were just using the HRA to hold the homes. But all of the development will be done in the HRA, and then if and when we are moving homes from the HRA into the company would effectively be buying them off the HRA using general fund borrowing. And then on this particular question about the Homes for Haringey option, so to the extent that it's helpful, this paper is the third paper that Cabinet have considered on the setting up of the wholly owned company. The first of those papers, which came to Cabinet, I think, in July 2018, did talk about the other options that we considered for setting up the company, including the potential role of Homes for Haringey. We haven't kind of re-rehearsed that set of arguments and that set of alternative options in this paper because of the kind of narrative thread that exists along the three, if you see what I mean. But it certainly was actively considered, and for the reasons that Councillor Ibrahim has described, then set aside at that point in the process.
Thank you for that. I mean, just for maybe for future reference, it would be helpful if that could be described, because all the questions that have come to you tonight have been because that information isn't in the pack about that this is actually the wholly owned company then is for intermediate, it is for properties, it's for housing that will cross-subsidise the social aims. And that isn't explicit at all in the documentation.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, housing is an issue that people are very passionate about. I have seen 3 councillors who have indicated their intent, their desire to speak. I'll take people in the order that I saw them. I saw Councillor Rossetti first, then I saw Councillor Brabazon, then I saw Councillor Carlin. So I'm going to take them in that order. So Councillor Rossetti, please. So if you could ask all 3 questions at once, please, slowly, so that Councillor Ibrahim to take some notes if you need to. You okay with that? Okay.
I just got two questions. First of all, I'm asking as a councillor, but I also sit on the board of Homes for Haringey, and I share and agreed with comments made by Councillor Bevan. First question, I understand that this company is going to be formed by 3 directors, which are going to be nominated by 3 council officers. The staff would be, or again, made by council officers. So my question is, since the direction of travel is to actually directly deliver those 1,000 homes, who is actually going to build the houses? Those officers do have the skills to do it. And the second question is, since Home for Haringey is a tenancy management company, will Homes for Haringey be managing those tenancies? Thanks.
The answer to your last question is yes. The first question is, I'm not quite clear. So our officers wouldn't directly be building the homes. We would obviously be entering into contractual relationships with companies to build them.
So there will be tenders to companies to build the houses?
Yes, my presumption is that our direct officers will not be physically building the homes. I don't know if that's in Dan's skill set, but I presume it will be a tender process to actually, I mean, obviously the ultimate, future, maybe in a few years' time, would be to develop an in-house direct labour organisation, which did used to exist. But I don't think, let's walk before we run.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that officers will be building the houses. I was just wondering whether they could be managed a company that builds houses, but that's another, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Brabazon.
To explain, I listened to what you said very carefully, but I couldn't quite understand it. So perhaps you could just explain it again. We talked about. We're all committed to the 1,000 homes being built, and that these would be council homes. Can you clarify whether you said, which I thought you did, that this would be done by the company? Because my understanding is the company can't build council homes. So can you please clarify who's going to be building what? Because my understanding, having read the report, is that the company will not be building council homes because of the HRA borrowing cap. So where we were in July, we aren't in February. And I listened to you very carefully, but I was very unclear from the answer you gave. So can you now say unequivocally who is building what? And I've just one more question after that.
So I'm sorry that you've not understood, Councillor Brabazon, but let me explain clearly. I think I've been quite clear, but hope... and I apologise for that. What I would say is that what I've been clear about is that we are in a different position than we were. And if you recall, Councillor Brabazon, we spent a couple of years on the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny panel together, and one of the recommendations that we made was, under the circumstances, because of the restrictions that were put upon us by previous governments with the capping of HRA borrowing, was that an alternative to what was being proposed in previous years was to set up our own wholly owned company so that we could get round those borrowing requirements. Now, one of the key challenges we faced with the proposed HDV was this: we were perhaps putting ourselves in a situation where if things changed, we weren't able, under those types of agreements, to change our approach. Well, actually, this is a perfect example of how this is an approach that gives us, because it's directly controlled by us, because we're not in a contractual relationship with anybody, that we can change what we're doing to reflect the changing climate. So one of the accusations that we were made, that was levelled against us when we were raising our concerns, was that well, you know, effectively you're waiting for Corbyn. Well, actually, we didn't need to. The HRA borrowing cap was lifted in October, so we are now in a position where we can directly borrow in order to deliver those homes, and that is what we are doing. In terms of the wholly owned company and what it can do, that doesn't mean you just throw all of that out, because there are still things which I think the report is very clear on that can be done within this company, which many other councils have done. And if you recall, Cllr Brabazon, we spoke to local authorities who had done this type of work and who are still continuing with their wholly owned companies, because actually it can deliver for you a flexibility which a single approach doesn't always. And if you recall, one of our favourite phrases, and I'll repeat it again, is horses for courses.
I do understand all of that, and of course I sat on the scrutiny panel and, as you know, did an enormous amount of research myself into all these things. So I don't need you to tell me all of that. What I want you to do is to... no, I asked you a direct question which you haven't answered. My direct question was, who's going to build the 1,000 council homes? Because you said, I think, in your reply to Councillor Williams, that the company would be doing that. But the report says the company can't do that. So I'm asking you unequivocally to answer my question.
The council will be building the homes, and that there is the company can build homes. What it can't do is hold homes, as you well know, which we then issue at secure tenancies, because only councils can issue secure tenancies. And one of the decisions that we had to make, if the HRA borrowing cap wasn't lifted and the wholly owned company would be building all of the homes, was whether to hold these homes within the company or transfer them over to Homes for Haringey and issue secure tenancies. My preference was always a secure tenancy. So even if we had developed these homes within the wholly owned company, which can borrow, and that's effectively what the wholly owned company was able to do previously to a higher degree, which the council couldn't do. That's why, under those circumstances, you would build within the company and then transfer the homes that you wanted to let at secured tenancies to the council. Now we can deliver directly through the council those secure tenancies. However, we can still set up the wholly owned company to do some of the work around cross-subsidising some of the more difficult schemes.
Can I just ask that you ask all other questions now, please? One more. Fine.
Respect, it was the same question, but I had to ask it twice. So going to my final question, the company, I understand, I've read the report, and the company will be acting as a registered provider, have a sub-company which will be a registered provider. So the tenancies that will be delivered through the sub-company as a registered provider would be, if they would be assured tenancies. No, there would be no secure tenancies. Are you saying that the company would build the council houses on behalf of the council and transfer them back to the council? Is that what you just said?
No, it would have done had the HRA borrowing cap not been lifted. Now we don't need to do that, because we can build them directly ourselves. So the company itself cannot issue a secure tenancy. It can only issue an assured tenancy. I'm sure you know that, Councillor Brabazon.
The question was who was building. The council will be building the council houses itself.
Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, that was responded to. Thank you. Right, Councillor Carlin.
Thank you for clarifying, Councillor Ibrahim. Yes, okay.
So my first question is regarding your statement to do with the manifesto and building through a wholly owned company. Now, obviously, we're not building through a wholly owned company, so we're not doing anyhow at the moment what our manifesto said. We're building the homes directly, which I'm sure nobody would disagree with, but you'd said earlier that we were building the homes through a wholly owned company. We're setting up the wholly owned company because it was part of our manifesto commitment. But we're no longer building homes through the wholly owned company. I don't think our manifesto commitment was for a wholly owned company to hold homes at market rent or at intermediate rent to cross-subsidise other homes. That's my first question. So what I'm saying is we're already veering off our manifesto commitments because we need to be flexible. And when we wrote our manifesto, we had no idea that, for example, the housing revenue grant would be lifted. So I'm not criticising, I'm just pointing out we're being flexible. The second question that I would like to ask, which wasn't that, the first one was clarification. Okay, the first one was clarification. The second one, which I would like to ask, which was not answered by a question was asked by Councillor Bevan, which wasn't answered, was have we got legal advice that you can use the flexible housing grant to set up a company? The flexible housing grant is a homelessness grant is to help us to prevent homelessness. Can £500,000 of that be used to actually set up a company? And do we have legal advice about that? And the third question which I'm asking, which is as a board member, or I would like you to confirm, and I'm asking this as a board member of Homes for Haringey, is Homes for Haringey, as I'm sure you would acknowledge, or I would ask you whether you would acknowledge, is in effect a wholly owned company. The company is wholly owned by Haringey Council. Although it is an arm's length company, it is a wholly owned company of just a slightly different structure. But to describe it as something else is incorrect. Homes for Haringey is actually a wholly owned company. Thank you.
So just before I pass on questions 2 and 3 to Councillor Ibrahim, obviously, funny enough, I actually have a copy of this wonderful document, which is our manifesto. I'm just reading from page 3 of the document. It says, our preference is to build our own housing on our own land and will aim to create the in-house capacity for our council to do so, as well as building new homes will ensure there is a greater access to all tenures of housing for Haringey's residents. One of the reasons that we will have the WOC is so we can hold different tenures of housing. So it's clear that this is fundamentally within what our manifesto says. Councillor Ibrahim.
So, yeah, thank you for that, Cllr Ejiofor. So, and thanks for reminding us all of our manifesto commitments on which we all stood. And I'm sure we all remain committed to that. In terms of the legal structures of Homes for Haringey, I think it's unfortunate that we are in a position where we're here debating that, because these are issues that we have been discussing with Homes for Haringey on an ongoing basis, and I'd ask you maybe to go back to the organisation that you represent and ask them to clarify those discussions that they've had with us, and I think that would probably be helpful under the circumstances, because what I don't want to do here is create an atmosphere of some kind of disagreement between Homes for Haringey and the council, which does not exist. So in terms of your initial statement, which suggests or implies that I said that we will not be directly delivering. No, I've not said that. No, I've not said that. What did you say then? Oh.
Sorry, what I said was, I understood from what you had said earlier in a response to a previous question that the reason that we were setting up a wholly owned company was that it was part of our manifesto commitment to set up a wholly owned company to deliver housing. Now, we are setting up a wholly owned company, but the council gladly can deliver our housing on our own. That was my initial question, but I understand that was clarified by Councillor Ejiofor. My second question, which hasn't been answered, my third question, which wasn't, yeah.
So I distinctly recall that Dan Hawthorne did actually answer that question around the use of the flexible homelessness grant, but I'm more than happy to ask him to repeat the answer he gave earlier.
Yeah, which is simply that because as we've been discussing, the form of housing that we'd expect to be held in the wholly owned company is forms of kind of affordable housing, intermediate housing, which we would expect to be able to play a role in tackling homelessness. So I'm satisfied that I'm satisfied both for as it were, for my own part, that that's a legitimate use of the money, but also that the legal and finance teams have gone over this report and provided their comments and assured us that that's kind of within the powers that we've got. So I don't think we have an issue there.
Sorry, what I didn't get an answer from was, do you agree that Homes for Haringey is in effect a wholly owned company?
Homes for Haringey is an arm's length management organisation.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, I think we've been asked and responded to a number of questions on this. Can I now ask if Cabinet can turn to pages 778 to 779 of your pack. The recommendations are at paragraphs 3.1 to 3.6. Cabinet colleagues, are they agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. Item number 11, which is property licensing designation, which is pages 289 to 566 of your pack. Councillor Ibrahim, could you kindly introduce your report, please?
Okay, so Haringey is a borough which has traditionally had a very high level of private rented properties. Current estimates are that around a third of households in Haringey are privately renting, and this exceeds the national average by about 14%. So between 2001 and 2011, our private rented sector has grown by almost a half, so around 45%, and it's an upward trend which we think is going to continue. So, and this is as a result of the current low levels of access and availability of affordable public sector housing. So houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, as we describe them, are a huge component of the private rented sector and provide accommodation for a wide range of individuals and increasingly, unfortunately, families. And it's vital that these properties are well and effectively regulated to ensure they are safe and compliant with the environmental regulations and others. The landlord licensing scheme proposed in this report provides a regulatory framework to support the many good landlords in Haringey, whilst also providing powers for officers to tackle the rogue landlords who do not comply. The scheme will also enable the council to know who owns and manages these properties through the issuing of licences to operate. The additional HMO licensing scheme has been developed following wide research, evidence gathering and public consultation, and I'm really pleased to bring this report to Cabinet for approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ibrahim. Cabinet colleagues, any questions for Councillor Ibrahim on this report? Okay, any questions from any other councillors present on this report? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. Paragraph 12.4.1 says the council takes a proactive approach to empty homes using a combination of encouragement and enforcement. Now, we haven't used EDMOs, which is empty dwelling management orders, or CPOs, very often, and we only use it in, and I quote, agrarious cases. How What other things are we going to do if those are the most proactive things that we can do to bring empty dwellings back into use? What other proactive things are we going to do?
So what I'm going to do is I'm conscious that I've got a couple of officers over there who've got a huge amount of expertise on this issue. So is it okay if I pass over for some answers?
Hello. I'm Lynn Seller, the interim team leader for the housing improvement team. So really this is to support our existing policy on empty homes. We do actually have a senior officer within my team who deals with empty homes in the private rented sector, and we do encourage, obviously, before the use of enforcement activity, an ongoing relationship with empty home owners if they obviously can be found, and offer advice and guidance and assistance with bringing those empty homes back into use without the need to have enforcement powers. So really the use of CPO is an extreme end of the process, but unfortunately one that does appear to work, although not every property goes to Secretary of State. The threat of things going to Cabinet for approval for Secretary of State is enough for people to realise that we are quite serious about the fact that that property is blighting the neighbourhood. The use of empty property management dwelling orders is a very expensive proposal and not something that the local authority has wanted to go down the route. And that's partly because an empty dwelling, even in a blighted state, still has quite a lot of market value, and then to obviously renovate that property, we wouldn't get the money back that it would cost us to spend on those. So we would continue with our proactive guidance, advice and assistance in that field. We don't have grants anymore, but it is something that we are constantly looking into if there is a requirement for people to need financial assistance to help them bring empty properties back into use, with the idea that we would do what we used to do, which is to ask them to provide it as temporary accommodation for homelessness families.
Thank you very much. Any other councillors have any questions present? Okay, thank you very much. Right, can I ask Cabinet if you can turn to page 291 of your pack. The recommendations were paragraphs 3.1 to 3.5. Cabinet colleagues, are these agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, back to the normal running order of the agenda. We're now discussing the borough plan. Oh, okay. That's me. Right. Now, we might have mentioned it before earlier on today, but this administration sought to deliver at least 1,000 additional council homes at council rents for the people of Haringey during the forthcoming 4 years. And we said that within this document here, which is one of my favourite documents, which is the manifesto that the Labour Party ran and won on. But our role is from turning this into action. And in turning this into action, we need to do this, which is the borough plan. And what we are now is, having consulted on the borough plan, we need to go out and publish it. Haringey is our home, and quite frankly, we're proud of it. We're ambitious for Haringey, and we have an ambitious future for the people who live here. And the borough plan itself sets out the priorities of this council and our partners for the forthcoming 4 years, and sets out the framework upon which we will seek to deliver these things. To achieve our goals, we need to change some of the things that we do and some of the ways that we do them. We are committed as an administration to running an open, collaborative council that genuinely engages people in shaping our borough's future. It is important that people feel that they can have confidence in us to do the right thing and to trust the way in which we do things, and the fact that, actually, we're always on their side. The default position of this administration is to deliver services directly where this is prudent to do so, and in order to maximise accountability, quality and other benefits to the community, as well as improving value for money where possible. These are the objectives that we are setting for ourselves, and these are the objectives that are contained within this borough plan. We believe that public services need to be responsive to change and more democratically accountable. The borough plan within it sets out our priorities as an administration, and the consultation engagement has confirmed that these are also top priorities for Haringey's residents. And these are around housing Haringey's people, We believe that increasing the supply of traditional council housing is one of the most important things that we can do. We're also clear that supporting renters and tenants with our landlord licensing scheme will also have a huge impact on Haringey residents, a third of whom rent in the private sector. We're also keen to ensure that we can build and retain wealth in our community. We are committed that we will work to increase the prosperity of Haringey residents. We will put greater emphasis on procuring goods and services locally. We will support small and medium-sized businesses to create high-quality local jobs. Whether small, medium or large businesses, we want to work positively with them. The community wealth building agenda will be at the centre of our approach for ensuring that every public pound spent will deliver the maximum possible public benefit. However, we also need to take a view about how we as a council will work on reducing serious violent crime. And we're going to be setting up a public health approach to tackling youth violence with our young people at risk strategy, which will be coming to this forum sometime soon. It's also clear that we wish to reduce inequality and make Haringey a fairer place. And partly that's one of the things that underpins our intention and our desire to have a successful Fairness Commission. Within the Borough Plan, the Council is also prepared to make 3 pledges. If you have a chance to read through the pack in front of you on page 86, you will see that we make a pledge to our residents. On page 88, it is clear we also make a pledge to the voluntary sector, who are in many situations our partners in helping us deliver the things that we want to do. And on page 90 in the pack, we make a pledge to business. Ultimately, we can't do everything that we want to do as a council without working with the stakeholders and partners that we have around the borough. Consequently, this is why this is not a corporate plan, this is a borough plan. We're working with people who share the same values as us, and I urge comrades to agree with it. Oh, sorry, that's right. Can I ask if there are any questions on where we are with it? Before we get to any questions, I need to draw your attention to the EQIA, which is in the second pack here. There's some information contained in the second pack of the papers at pages 81 to 84. There's also some minor amendments that need to be made to the Borough Plan before publication on the web and with the MTFS in relation to the housing objectives section at page 46. And some typographical errors that need to be rectified at table 1.1 on pages 25 to 26 and page 38. I'm asking Cabinet, when the time comes, to agree to delegate authority to the Assistant Director for Communications and Strategy in consultation to complete these and other minor amendments. But before we get there, can I ask if there are any questions on this report? No questions from Cabinet. Councillor Dennison.
Surprise. So I sympathise with the goal of the local procurement stuff. I think it's a reasonably good idea. But are we concerned that actually if there's similar policies throughout London, then actually it would potentially be, because we're such a fluid city, actually it could be detrimental to our residents and businesses who, if we have lots of boroughs that have only local procurement and policies, that actually everybody puts up their walls?
Okay, this is actually ultimately depends upon your definition of local. Obviously, one of the things where this comes from is the Preston model, where Preston Council sought to spend as much money as possible, not just by themselves, but also by the other public sector partners, stakeholders within their local economy. Now, Preston is a place where there's lots of countryside around the outside. So the definition of local in Preston is not quite the same definition of local that we have to use here in Haringey. So part of our community wealth building approach will be just to look at how we spend money locally in a broader sense. So whilst we might want to spend it just within our boroughs, we're quite well aware that some businesses just over the border employ local people, local Haringey people, have local Haringey suppliers, do work elsewhere in Haringey. So it's about developing that approach, and we will be going out to have a broader conversation with businesses, with stakeholders about what local should mean and how our community wealth building policy should be delivered. It really is important that we do seek to rattle local government funding and public sector money which comes from Haringey, in and around Haringey as much as possible, rather than sending it off to shareholders in the Virgin Islands. Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask a question, really, because there's no one here from the Environment and Community Safety Committee. But you were talking about crime and the fear of crime, and especially in the EQIA that I mentioned earlier in your borough plan. So looking at the flexible police resources budget that will be cut, I'm assuming you're not taking up my OSC's recommendations not to cut that. So if that continues to be cut, what extra support or resources are we able to give the police in order to tackle the crime that is currently not only in our borough, but obviously, you know, spread throughout? But what are we doing specifically in order to support that part of the borough plan?
Okay, it's an interesting idea that that as a council we should, you know, first and foremost be spending additional money to help the police to do this, because partly as a council what we need to do is to work with our communities to build, apart from anything else, better partnerships with the police. Right? One of the things that we are doing is we are developing our young people at risk strategy, which again is a document which will come to this forum for agreement and further comment, and that is going to take a broader public health view about how we can address the crime and youth violence issues that we're seeing within our borough. All right? I know Councillor Blake has a key role in this, and I will pass him on to him to further respond to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think just a couple of points around this. I think there will be some impact in terms of this decision, but I think there's also a decision I think that's been taken at the Met that they're not going to carry on with the scheme. I mean, it's been a very useful resource for us as a council in terms of directing resources around enforcement activity. But I think the comment around the council funding the police, I mean, obviously we, you know, quite frankly, I think in the kind of the media battle around resources and austerity, the police have been doing very, very well, and obviously there's going to be a huge increase, I think, from the Mayor's precept under the council tax, that it's going to be targeted directly to the Met. I think in terms of that public dialogue, what frankly, in terms of my position, I think is underplayed is the whole impact of austerity, if you like, around the kind of safety net that we as a council, along with voluntary organisations as well, and faith organisations in the community, you know, provided, particularly around vulnerable young people. I mean, 8 years of austerity has absolutely eroded that, and you know, the cuts that we've seen to our youth service, I think, over the last 8 years kind of clearly sort of demonstrate that. So, you know, I think there's been a lot of emphasis around policing. It's got a huge contribution to make. I quite vociferously, you know, have quite vociferous discussions with the borough commander. You know, I'm particularly of the view that I would like to see more, you know, uniformed officers out on the beat, making relationships with communities rather than more stop and search as, you know, interventions that are, you know, and knife crime orders that the Home Secretary's, you know, now passing through legislation with no consultation with affected communities. You know, I'd like to see more of that kind of presence, that visible presence out on the street. I hope we see more of that with the additional resources that they're receiving. But, you know, I think in terms of the public, as I said, the kind of public discourse, there isn't enough emphasis in terms of the vital services that we provide as a council with partners out in the community to keep vulnerable children safe. And that's why we're developing this strategy and taking that forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Connor. Okay, any other questions? Nope. Okay. Can I ask that Cabinet turns to page 24, the recommendations of paragraph 3.1.1 and 3.1.2, and subject to the the notes that I mentioned earlier with regard to the EQIA. Can I ask Cabinet if we're comfortable with agreeing these recommendations? Can we agree them? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. Item number 12, fees and charges, 2019-20, pages 567 to 680. Okay. Councillor Berriman, could you kindly introduce your report, please?
Thank you. Yeah, it's important as part of our financial planning that we comply with council policies on reviewing fees and charges as a minimum annually and taking account of issues such as the general economic climate, the council's overall financial position and delivery of the objectives of the corporate plan. And taking all the relevant factors into account, I believe the increases in fees and charges proposed in this report are appropriate, and I commend this report to the Cabinet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Berriman, can I ask Cabinet, do you have any questions for Councillor Berriman on this report? I'll take that to be a no. Councillor Dennison, do you have any questions? Oh, please come forward.
I think this is my last one. So we are increasing fees for residents using our parks for sports activities, but we're not increasing fees for commercial events in parks. Is there any reason why?
I might have to refer to this. I do recall, in terms of some of the events in parks, it's a very competitive market, and the feeling was that the fee had reached the level that you could still, if the choice was made, get the booking for the concert or whatever it may be, that there's a lot of other councils out there now looking to get this business. So I think that was the main reason, but he's just walked out of the room. I'll get that checked and send back, but I think that was the difference there, was the competitive nature of that market, the sort of fees were currently appropriately set.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Dennison. We will get you a written response from Steve later on. All due course. Don't worry. Okay, any other questions? No. Okay, that having been said, if I can ask page 5, the recommendations on page 567 to 568, 3.1 A to C. Cabinet colleagues, are these agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. 13, outcome of consultation on revised gambling policy. We're now turning to pages 681 to 760 of your pack. Councillor Amin, welcome.
Thank you. So the Council is required to review its statement of gambling policy every 3 years. This report notes that there has been no changes to the Gambling Act 2005, which expects local authorities to permit the use of premises under Section 153 of the Act for gambling purposes. However, since 2016, local authorities are encouraged by changes under the Licensing Condition Code of Practice to place a requirement for betting operators to operate to demonstrate a thorough risk assessment. That is consideration they have to give to the local area in which they are hoping to operate in. So for the revision of this policy, Haringey has compiled background figures and evidence for each ward on deprivation and crime, setting out both those things and also the location of schools, vulnerable service providers, care centres, that kind of organisation. So the supplementary, that's all included in the supplementary document which sets out the wards with the highest levels of crime and the likelihood of local community being at risk from gambling harm in these wards. There's no hard and fast rule, unfortunately, for any of this, but the authority is saying to betting operators that these are our most vulnerable areas, and the expectation that we have is that they will give consideration to the location and makeup of the local area in which they wish to operate in. During the consultation period, only one response was received. That was from our one of our favourite councillors, Councillor Mitchell, relating to Woodside Ward needing to be included, in which he asked that the Woodside Ward should be included in the list of vulnerable areas. So the local area profile was amended to include Woodside Ward, as the betting shops on Lordship Lane have a significant high levels of crime around it, and they're both in Knoll Park and in Woodside Ward. That's as much as I have to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Amin. Can I ask whether Cabinet colleagues have got any questions for Councillor Amin on this report? Councillor Tucker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could ask my colleague, given the high social cost of gambling addiction and the very negative impact on those affected and their families of gambling addiction, which is something that impacts particularly on groups who are already marginalised and on lower incomes, whether she'd be able to comment further on the ability and the prospects of the Council in trying to reduce this potential harm and particularly prevent casinos being set up to prey on the most vulnerable people.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. I think I can categorically say that we, at the moment, have no casinos in the borough, and we haven't received any applications for casinos in the borough. So that is one harm that our residents are protected from. Can I ask if the officers want to add something on this, please?
I am Dale Barrett, the licensing team leader. We're not at risk of getting a casino in Haringey, to be honest with you, unless the Secretary of State makes more licences available across the country for authorities to bid for. Then there's just no ability for that. And we have yet to see what's going to happen when the changes to the betting shops, their fixed odd betting terminals, come into effect. At the moment, it's looking like bingo premises are going to be on the rise, but again, they need to find suitable locations, and the area profiles and the local area profiles will then come into their own then, and of course planning permission as well. So for the local authority, even though we've still got the aim to permit, there are still the other factors that betting operators will need to overcome really before they can look to operate in the borough.
Okay, Councillor Ibrahim.
Mine's a question, probably more to the officers, and it's around some of the challenges this borough and other boroughs surrounding us have traditionally faced around private members' clubs. So there used to be a huge problem all the way along Green Lanes from Enfield all the way down to Stoke Newington in terms of what is defined as private members' clubs, but effectively it's, all night card games, etc. And this is where a lot of the huge losses are made, and particularly targeted at certain communities. I know Islington Council were doing some work over a number of years over the challenges on Caledonian Road in particular. So are we still on top of that? I know it's not like it used to be, but can we still be conscious of some of those types of places with the blacked out windows?
We have been quite strong in dealing with these kind of premises over the years, and we've certainly, I think the enforcement action that's been taken in Green Lanes over the years has certainly changed the face of the types of businesses that we have down there. It is very rare nowadays that we actually come across venues such as that, and I suppose one of the partly because the Gambling Act 05 also made it possible for a premises with an alcohol on licence to be able to offer some form of gambling. So it has legalised that, and it's now something that they need to consider when they're putting in their application. And we know about them, we go in and we inspect them and can carry out enforcement on them. So we very rarely come across one that is unknown to us nowadays.
Councillor Berryman. Sorry, slightly step out of protocol, I guess, but On the recent Homes for Haringey organised homeless count last year, it was part of the en route late at night between 2 and 3 in the morning. We went down both Tottenham High Road and Wood Green High Road, which isn't normally what I'm doing between 2 and 3 in the morning of a weeknight, certainly. But it was a little bit shocking to me to see the 24-hour casinos they build themselves at, but they're slot machine places, quite busy, quite a very depressing scene, and really just wanted to ask if the Cabinet member would agree that we want to do as much as we can to try and regulate these type of establishments, because the problems that come with gambling late in the night, you've incurred some losses. What do you do? It was really a bit of a shock to myself, I admit.
The adult gaming centres that we have in High Road, Wood Green and High Road N17, they are licensed premises. They generate, I would say, just as much crime as the betting shops do, because they offer similar types of machines. So when a punter loses his money and takes out the frustration on that machine, it then goes down as criminal damage. They're just below the betting shops, really, in terms of the crimes that we get generated from them. And also, as you say, they are predominantly used mainly at night time. So, yeah, the people you see in there at night time are not going to be the people you're going to see in there during the daytime. And they are such that once a punter goes in there, they can stay in there for hours. There is, the ATM is in there. They can have hot and cold drinks in there. They are well catered for. The only change that the Gambling Commission has brought in recent years is that the betting operator, the staff on premises, must now go and interact with the customer. If they feel that that customer is spending too much time on the machines, they have to go and do some kind of welfare check on that customer during that time.
I think we will do, and I'm sure you would agree, we will do everything we can to ensure that where we can reduce the harm to people, especially those who are more vulnerable, is done by the enforcement activities that we undertake.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other councillors have any questions for this? Councillor Dennison? And Councillor Connor afterwards, yeah?
No, it's like very, very... just to follow up to Councillor Ibrahim's question was, so I live close to West Green Road and Phillip Lane, and there seems to be quite a few private members' clubs around that area still, and I didn't know whether there was actually a movement from Green Lanes maybe to actually they've then moved on to those, not necessarily on the really, really large roads, but actually on those roads, and whether you've had any information about those.
There are, last time I checked, there were 3 licensed social clubs off Phillip Lane that we know of, and as I say, they are licensed and they do get enforcement checks. Predominantly when an officer goes in there, the odd time it's been an illegal gaming machine that we've found in there. So they try to get the higher casino type jackpot machines, which they're not permitted to have. So the officers normally do a tailgate operation, it's called, yes, tailgate operation, where they'll go and seize those machines and crush them on site, really. And that continues.
Councillor Connor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So a slightly more detailed question. So on the revised gambling policy, paragraph 16.1 of the policy references the Gambling Commission's licence, conditions and codes of practice, which came into effect on the 6th of May 2018. The Commission updated these conditions and codes on the 31st of October 2018. Has this update been taken into account in the gambling policy? I've got one other question. Shall I go straight into that? With regards to the local area risk assessments referred to in paragraph 16.3 of the policy, in the last 3 years, how often has the Council requested an assessment of a premises not making a fresh application or seeking a variation to its licence? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The new conditions that were brought in were around fraud prevention, and requiring the betting operator to put better practices in place, really. So from the licensing authority perspective, we would check on that, but it's really the Gambling Commission that would have the primary role of checking for fraud-related issues on betting premises. And with risk assessments, all the operators have been requested to submit their local area risk assessment. And in fact, apart from one, an adult gaming centre that we're waiting on, and in the last year, so we've had 2 new applications in the last year for betting premises, and they have done what's required of them by law and submitted their risk assessments with their application form.
Just for clarification, so are you saying that, so do we as a council request assessments of the premises if they don't make a fresh application?
No, we don't, to be honest. It was something that myself and the police licensing officer decided that we wanted to have sight of all of their local area profiles so that we had it on file, basically. So they were all written to and all were quite willing to and happy to hand over their risk assessments.
Thank you very much. Okay. The recommendations for this report are on page 682 of your pack. The recommendations are set out at paragraphs 3.1 to 3.4. Cabinet colleagues, are these agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. 16. Admission to schools. Determined admissions arrangements for 2020-2021. These are on pages 583 to 930 of your pack. Councillor Weston, could you introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. As you said, this report seeks to set the council school admission arrangements for the academic year 2020 to 2021. You will have read in the report that the local authority is required to consider and determine admissions arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools by the 28th of February in each determination year. And we carried out a consultation to inform that decision-making process from the 26th of November last year to the 7th of January of this year. The consultation responses and a discussion of the consultation responses is set out at paragraph 6.12 onwards, and previously, paragraph 6 onwards. You'll see from the report that we're proposing no changes to the oversubscription criteria for community and voluntary controlled schools for 2020 to 2021. However, we are proposing to reduce the published admissions numbers for Wellbourne and Tiverton primary schools by 1 form of entry each, so that's 30 reception pupils each. This proposed reduction, we think, is based, well, we know, is based on projected enrolments at the school, and we are hopeful that the proposed reduction will enable those schools more effectively and better to manage their budgets, which we know are coming under increasing pressures. We don't anticipate that families in the areas that are served by these schools will have any difficulty in finding school places, as there are surplus places across both planning areas. With that, I would ask Cabinet to agree the recommendations set out in paragraph 3.1 of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Weston. Any Cabinet colleagues have any questions for Councillor Weston on her report? Okay, any councillors present have any questions for Councillor Weston on the report? That having been said, can I ask that we turn to page 854? The recommendations are at paragraph 3.1 and there are 6 bullet points to note. Cabinet colleagues, are these agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. 17. Minutes of other bodies. These are pages 931 to 934. Can I ask that we note the Cabinet member signing minutes for the 18th of January 2019? Is that noted? Yes, that's noted. Thank you very much. Significant delegated actions, 18, pages 935 to 944. Can I ask that Cabinet note the significant and delegated actions taken by directors in January? Are these noted? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. New items of urgent business. There are no new items of urgent business. Exclusion of the press and public. Okay, I'm assuming that